Welcome into episode 217 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Scott McLaughlin. Bridget is on vacation. Scott, the calendar has flipped to September, which is significant in a lot of different facets. You have the NFL starting, fall is around the corner, which means that the NHL season is also around the corner, and that starts this month with training camp beginning in just a few weeks, and captain's practices have begun over at Warrior Arena. Yesterday on what was it, Wednesday?
Tuesday. First captain's practice was Tuesday. It was open to the media, so I think there's 3 of them over these next couple weeks that are open to media. Rest are closed. So yeah, it is. It's a start. That's officially, like, I guess it's not an official team activity because it's just captain's practices. There's no coaches, GMs there, anything like that. But it's the team getting together. It's guys getting back into town. Not everyone was there for the first one, which is not unusual. Guys will kind of trickle in at their own pace over these next couple weeks before, as you mentioned, training camp opens on September 20th.
Yeah, so I think a good place to start here is with some personnel updates, and the one that comes to mind is that the Bruins signed old friend Danton Heinen to a professional tryout, which Bruins fans are familiar with Heinen. He played for the Bruins for, I want to say, three and a half seasons or so before he was traded. He was a solid third-line fixture for them, including the year they went to the Cup Finals. He had chemistry with Charlie Coyle. We probably don't think they'd be playing together this year should he sign for the Bruins because of the need up the middle, and Coyle will be playing higher. But Heinen was always a good player. He wasn't flashy, but he was reliable. He was one of those players where when he was on the ice, you didn't really notice him all too much. And sometimes that's a good thing. It just means he's steady. So it's an interesting professional tryout signing, and I definitely think that you look at the Bruins' third-line prospects and you look at Geeky and Frederick or whomever, it doesn't hurt to have another established younger player. He's like probably second half of his 20s, probably 26 or so, 27. But it's an interesting signing. It's outside of Pasternak and Marchand and I guess DeBrusque, maybe Zacha. It's just another one of those situations where the Bruins have a lot of good forwards on this team going into next year. Good, not great. I think Heinen falls into that category. But what do you make of the signing, Scott? I don't think it's a bad thing at all. And I say signing, tryout, I suppose. But assuming he's part of this team, he's just a player that's going to add to the mix. And another reason why the Bruins, they're great in goal. They're great in the blue line. There's a little bit to be desired up front, but there's still a solid group up front, and he's just another one of those players where he's a good NHL player. He's not going to make an all-star team, but he's going to help this team at least with stability and reliability.
Yeah, and it seems like each of these guys that they bring in, there's an element of upside where it's, okay, they can probably play in the fourth line, but maybe they move up to the third. But they also each bring sort of different traits that you're like, oh, okay, I can see why the Bruins might want to bring this in. And, with Jesper Boqvist, it was, hey, he's a really good skater. And, you look at the bottom 6 and there's some, whether it's Geeky, Frederick's a good skater, not great. Lucic obviously has never blown people away, and certainly not at this point in his career. And you're thinking, okay, yeah, they could probably use a little more speed there, and Boqvist fits. Then you get Alex Chiasson on a PTO, and it's, okay, well, there's a bigger body that'll go to the front of the net, can play net front on power play. It's, you're like, okay, I see why they could be looking at that. I see the picture of what they're envisioning of where Chiasson could potentially fit. And it's the same with Heinen, because now I think you look at that bottom 6, and it's guys who are used to right now, pre-Heinen, it's guys who are used to playing in a little more offensive situations than I think the Bruins' third and fourth lines are generally used for. Patrick Brown's played some shutdown minutes, in the little bit of time that he's been an NHL regular. I think Trent Frederick's a good defensive player, but Geeky was starting like over 60% offensive zone starts in Seattle. Boqvist is a more offensive guy. Lauko, Greer on exactly like shutdown players. Lucic isn't that at this point in his career. And you look at Danton Heinen, and one of the things that has always been his strength, no matter what his offensive game has done, is he's always been a really solid two-way player, good defensively, makes smart plays, helps get pucks out of the zone, isn't going to do, dumb things that lead to goals against. And in fact, continued to do that even last year with Pittsburgh. Um, his first year in Pittsburgh that was 2021, he set a career high in goals with 18, and he played up in the lineup a little bit for Pittsburgh that season. And then this past year, his offensive game kind of came crashing back a little bit. I think it was 8 goals or something in 65 games, and a little bit of dip in terms of offensive production. But his defensive play, all the analytics show you, was still really solid. He was second among Penguins forwards in terms of scoring chances against when he was on the ice. So yeah, maybe his offense took a dip, but teams weren't getting a lot of good chances when he was on the ice, and that's in part because he is a really smart player and a really good defensive player. So you look at the Bruins bottom six, and it's like, okay, yeah, I could see why they potentially look at it and say, man, we could probably use another good defensive guy down here who could maybe be part of as they try to figure out like what each line's going to do and look like and what its purpose is going to be, what its identity is going to be. If they end up with, a shutdown line on whether it's the third or fourth line, Heinen could be a part of that, probably more so than some of these other guys battling for jobs down there. So, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think there definitely could be a role for him. Obviously, nothing's guaranteed with a guy on a PTO. I think some of the guys signed to actual contracts, nothing's guaranteed. So especially Chiasson and Heinen, there's absolutely no guarantee that they're going to make the team or, play any sort of role. But I can see where Heinen could fit. So yeah, absolutely worth bringing him in. And he played for Jim Montgomery at the University of Denver. So there's an obvious connection there. I don't know. I don't really think there was like any bad blood when Heinen left. He got traded for Nick Ritchie. That was just kind of a regular hockey trade where the Bruins thought they needed something a little different. Um, but yeah, now he's back and obviously with the coach he's familiar with. So absolutely worth a shot.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jim Montgomery and the connection there. And for those who don't know, Heinen won a national championship with Jim Montgomery in Denver. So, or was that the year
I
after
think
he
he left
graduated?
the year before. I think they made the Frozen Four his final year there, and then it
Okay.
was the year after that they won the national title.
Okay, but still a top producer for Montgomery on that Denver team, which was a high caliber team. So you look at Danton Heinen's career numbers, and he's got 176 points in 413 NHL regular season games. So obviously he's less than a half a point per game guy a little bit, but career plus 10. So again, just kind of speaks to just that kind of set. That's him in a nutshell. Like sometimes a career snapshot like that really is accurate. And so that is Heinen right there. He's capable of popping in some points for you. Not at a point per game pace, not even at a half a point per game pace, but somewhere just south of that, but also as a career plus 10. So he's not a liability defensively, like you mentioned, Scott. So can Jim Montgomery get Danton Heinen if he were to make this team on a professional tryout? Can he get the best out of him offensively like he did for a lot of players last year? Maybe. But ultimately, he's a middle six forward at best, unless you're just riddled with injuries. And he's just, like I said, this is not to like speak negatively about him or anything like that. He's just kind of like he's another guy. Like he's another guy who is NHL caliber and will not hurt you and can help you in certain ways, but he's not going to like make you a contending team from a non-contending team. But you need players like that. You need players like Heinen because injuries happen in the NHL and you need depth. And unfortunately, you can't always have high-end depth like the Bruins had last year. So you have to find depth in other areas. And where this Bruins team, like I mentioned, they're solid on the back end, more than solid, and they're more than solid in goal. To just keep it seems like a random grouping of forwards. It really does. But it is. because Don Sweeney's had to get creative and he's had to try to find established NHL guys on the cheap, and that's why you're bringing in James Van Riemsdyk, and it's why you're bringing in, Patrick Brown and Boquist and Geeky and all these guys that kind of have to prove it a little bit. Heinen's another one. Are you surprised, Scott, that Heinen is available on a professional tryout? I mean, he's not. There's value there. I mean, obviously, you mentioned he went to Anaheim after being traded from Boston to Anaheim for Nick Ritchie, and then he went to Pittsburgh, and he was a solid contributor for all those teams in the role he had. Are you surprised other teams just didn't circle on him?
I am, because on the one hand, like I understand everyone's kind of up against with the cap. Cap didn't go up, whatever. Teams just didn't have money to spend. But I gotta imagine that like some point, I mean, obviously he's taking a PTO. I assume he would have been open to 1 year, like really cheap deal somewhere. Like I'm talking, $1 million or less. I mean, I think he only made $1 million last year. So he was already on that kind of really cheap deal. Um, so yeah, I'm a little surprised like no one brought him in, like, because again, he can play either wing. Like he's really solid as a fourth liner. He's not going to be out of place on your third line. And as you kind of allude to, like in an extreme pinch, you can probably get by with him on a second line for like a few games here and there. Certainly not really ideal, but yeah, you would think teams would see some value there and be willing to bring him in. Um, he doesn't play a whole lot on either special teams unit, so maybe that works against him. For those kind of bottom of the lineup jobs, I think teams, probably want someone who kills penalties a little more. And Heinen's done it at times, but it hasn't really been a regular part of his game, which is a little bit surprising considering, that his 5-on-5 defensive numbers have always been pretty good. Um, so yeah, I think it's kind of just a product of uh, teams being up against and just really not being willing to spend. There's been, a lot of teams that I think are just going to turn over their fourth line to younger players and kind of see how it goes. But um, yeah, I mean, there's no harm in bringing a guy in on a PTO. Like you don't have to commit anything to him. So good for the Bruins, I guess, that he didn't that he didn't get signed. Gives them another option. But yeah, I am a little surprised. Like of the guys, you kind of see more and more PTOs every day now as teams ramp up to camp. And of the guys signing them, I certainly think he was one of, if not the best forward still available, or you know, up there. Probably not the best, but he's up there. And um, yeah, little odd.
So obviously the Bruins lose Bergeron and Krejci in the offseason, and I think that's why you see, in addition to Lucic and Van Riemsdyk being NHL veterans that can come in and kind of be helpful in their own way, I do think that Sweeney brought those guys in, yes, because they were affordable, yes, because they filled, they addressed some needs of some departures, but also they can help in the locker room. I think Brad Marchand is kind of a lone wolf as far as a true NHL veteran. Like obviously David Pastrnak has been around for almost a decade at this point because he entered the league at 18 years old. So he's been around the block, McAvoy. But I consider even Pastrnak, who was around for 3 or 4 seasons before McAvoy, like I still consider those guys young veterans, right? They're still learning. Brad Marchand is a true veteran. There's levels to being an NHL veteran. And I think that Van Riemsdyk and Lucic, those guys came in, I think, to help fill certain voids that are no longer had to leave, but also to help in the leadership department. That said, as I mentioned, the Bruins forward group seems like a lot of random signings in the offseason to fill in holes. A lot of, a couple of random professional tryouts like to Alex Chason and Danton Heinen. And while a lot of these deals are short term and also prove it, like a tryout to prove it, thing, right? There are Bruins fans out there who might be asking, like, are these 1-year free agency signings, or like Geeky, I think it's a couple of years, but some of these flyers, these free agency flyers, are they getting in the way of a Lysell, a Beecher, a McLaughlin, a Merkulov, like these guys who a Lauko, Steen, whatever. If the full youth movement. Scott, to those Bruins fans that wondering that, I mean, I feel like jobs are up for grabs, but sometimes when the Bruins make these one year deal signings, it's kind of like, well, are they up for grabs for this 1 year? But I think the answer probably still is yes. Like, I think the names I just mentioned, like Lysell, Merkulov, McLaughlin, Beecher, Steen, Lauker, like those guys, if they perform in camp, the opportunity is there for them, regardless of any of these free agency signings and professional tryout signings this summer. Would you echo that?
Yeah, I totally agree. If any of those kids impress enough to win a lineup spot, they're still going to win it. I've been consistent on this throughout the offseason. Like, I didn't think the guys they have signed to NHL contracts necessarily were roadblocks. I think if, you know, Lysell or Merkulov or McLaughlin or whoever, like if they beat out one of those guys, I think the Bruins could pretty easily move on from one of those guys if they had to, throw them on waivers. If they clear, you throw them in Providence or whatever. Um, and now especially the PTO guys, like you beat those guys out, you just say, "Hey, thanks for coming in. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to sign you to a contract," and that's it. So, um, it does make it a little tougher. Obviously, the more competition you have, the tougher it gets to win a spot. If you take four of these veterans out of the equation, well, now there's a lot more opportunity for the kids to make it because there's just fewer guys they're competing with. So, yes, in that sense, it makes it tougher, but I don't see that as a bad thing. I'm not really a fan of like just handing anyone a job and saying run with it. Especially if you at all plan on being competitive. And I think the Bruins, based on the moves Sweeney made and based on the attitude of like everyone in that locker room, from what we've heard, they plan on being competitive. Like this is not. It might turn into a bridge year. It might, if things don't go to plan, there might be some selling at the deadline. But as of now, they're planning to try to be a playoff team and win games and see where that leads them. Like there's no acceptance on that team of, oh well, we're going to take a huge step back, hey, let's just go out there and have fun, guys, and whatever happens happens. No, it's like they they expect to be there again, not probably not to win the President's Trophy or set records, but they're not looking at themselves, to steal a storyline from the Red Sox season where, Chaim Bloom sort of screwed up by calling his team underdogs right after the trade deadline. I don't think the Bruins are looking at themselves as underdogs. I think they're looking at themselves as a competitive team that's right there with a bunch of other competitive teams. So, um, yeah, I think if you're that kind of team, you're not just handing jobs to kids and saying, go out there. Hey, we'll give you 15 minutes a night, and if you make some mistakes, so be it. No, they're saying, hey, if you're gonna win a spot, you're gonna win a spot. Like you're gonna have to beat out some guys who have played games in the NHL and been around a little bit. And I think that's fine. Like I have no problem with that approach. So, I do, you do see some of that from fans who want to see a youth movement. And I think this year could at some point turn into a youth movement, but that youth isn't just going to be handed NHL minutes without earning it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's it's going to be an interesting year to watch, Scott, and I'm really excited for it, and I know things didn't end great last year, but we've talked about it before. Every year brings new storylines, new things to watch, and I think there's a lot of entertaining storylines to follow this year. There's a lot of new faces. There's a lot of guys that need to rise to the occasion. A lot of chemistry up front is going to have to be formed. There's a lot of turnover up front, a lot. But all that said, this Bruins team, and I mean team, like in top to bottom, the Bruins team there's still far too many good players on this team, in my opinion, to at the very least not be in the mix for a playoff spot down the wire here. Come next spring. Obviously they're probably, and I know Pavel Zacha is probably gonna he's probably gonna put up a good amount of points alongside David Pastrnak, right? So he might be able to put up like 60 points for you this year. But the Bruins' high-end center depth is probably bottom 5 in the league, Scott. That's probably fair to say. I mean, most teams at least have a bona fide number one center at this point. Even a lot of the basement dwellers from years past, like look at Anaheim, right? Like Trevor Zegras is, he's a number one center that would probably be number one on Boston's team, young and raw. But I mean, maybe whatever. We could probably find 5 or 6 teams that might be in a similar boat as Boston up front. But what Boston does have is they have a lot of good NHL forwards. Not necessarily great outside of their top players, but good. And then on the back end and in goal, they are really good. So yeah, this team, you add in the fact that it's their centennial season and they have something to prove after last year's exit. And a lot of guys know that they have to step up and that there's opportunity. So I think this is a good chance for Charlie Coyle, right? Obviously, it's you watch Patrice Bergeron leave, and it's your first thought is probably, shit, this sucks. But if you're Charlie Coyle, when it's you, now you have an opportunity to be a top 2 center for the Boston Bruins. So can he elevate? He knows he has to. Can he? That's a storyline to follow, and the same goes for Pavel Zacha. So I think now that captain's practices have begun, and guys are still filtering in, Scott, but we have training camp coming up here. You know how on online and on social media, like the Bruins will always put out their line charts for practices and whatnot. People started to put out some line projections, and now that the season's around the corner, seeing the depth chart of Coyle and Zacha down the middle, or Zacha Coyle, however you want to look at it, actually seeing that now, is it kind of like setting in for you that this is what they're going with going forward, at least as far as we can tell? And what are your thoughts as that 1-2 combo going now that the season's coming? It's right around the corner. I mean, I'm excited for it. Obviously, I know the quality of their high-end center depth has gone down. What I'm excited for is to see if these two can rise to the occasion, because if they can't, then it could be tough for Boston to score this year outside of David Pastrnak,
Yeah, and it's and I think our last episode was 2 weeks ago, so this might have even been after our last episode. But Montgomery talked to Steve Conroy of the Boston Herald and did basically lay out at least his top 2 lines, and then gave a couple clues about his bottom 6 too. But yeah, it sounds like at least to start, he's planning on Pastrnak with Zacha and most likely Van Riemsdyk on the left, and then Marchand, Coyle, DeBrusk as a line. The other interesting thing from his comments was that he sees Trent Frederick staying on the wing, not moving to center, at least to start. He just really liked the way that he played on the wing last year, and Frederick himself even has kind of said that, while saying that like he'll play anywhere and he's comfortable playing anywhere. He did make a comment about like he really liked playing on the wing last year. So yeah, like, and the other thing Montgomery said is, in his mind, this is their team. Like, I know some fans are still holding out this hope that there's like a last minute trade for a center coming before opening night, but it's not happening, or at least I would be shocked if it happens, and they're not planning on it happening. So yeah, you do it's time to accept that this is what the depth chart looks like. We got to talk to Brad Marchand Tuesday after the first captain's practice, and I asked him about, Zach and Coyle have been around a little bit. I'm sure they understand that they don't have to try to beat Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci. But I asked Marchand, I was like, but are there, things you can tell them, things you can do to kind of help them step into those roles? And he talked about, it's going to be a collective effort because they're all going to have to build chemistry. If Marchand's with Coyle, they've played a little bit together towards the end of last season when Bergeron was out, but Coyle can't step in and try to play like Bergeron because he's not Bergeron, and Marchand can't play like he's still playing with Bergeron because he's not. And like Marchand said, he was like, him and Bergeron built what they had over so many years. I mean, more or less 12 straight seasons playing together with like very few interruptions. You're not going to have that kind of chemistry with your next center, no matter who it is. So yeah, like there's going to be adjustments all over from everyone. Coyle's going to have to adjust to playing with a Marchand on his wing. Marchand's going to have to adjust his game to Coyle being a center. And, you know, if you work at it and things start to click, like that can work. And from there, like then you kind of worry about what the offensive production is and what the point totals end up being. But like it starts with just figuring out how to play together. Because let's remember, this isn't the first time Charlie Coyle started the season as one of the top two centers. He did it 2 years ago when Krejci went over to the Czech Republic and didn't play that season. And it didn't go all that well. At that time it was Taylor Hall on his left, and those two just really kind of struggled to click. And I don't think it's because of lack of effort. I think they wanted to make it work. I think they worked at it. It just wasn't happening. And eventually it got to a point where obviously we know, Bruce Cassidy decided to make a change, and the second line became Eric Hall in the middle of Hall and Pasternak, and that worked better, basically up until the playoffs when it didn't. But then what happens this past season? Well, Coyle and Hall end up together again. And I remember early on last year, like I was kind of against it. I was like, geez, that didn't really look good last year. Why would you go back to it? And it worked a heck of a lot better this past season. Like, I think those two had learned a lot about playing with each other, even when they weren't on the same line, like just being around each other. Coyle and Marchand, they're not going to get till next season. Like, you can't have a do-over in this case. They've got to, if the Bruins are going to be successful, they have to figure it out. Just like Zacha and Pasternak, they had chemistry as wings all season together. Now as center and wing, they have to, they have to pick up where they left off last year, which was a pretty good place. And also, by the way, develop chemistry with, if it is James Van Riemsdyk to start or anyone else who might end up there. Like that's all going to be a process. And you're right, it's going to be a very interesting one to watch because, so much of the success of the Bruins this season is going to depend on it. It's going to depend on, those don't have to be like doesn't have to be the highest scoring top six in the NHL. It's probably not going to be, but they do have to play good hockey and, ultimately come out as pluses in terms of goals for versus goals against. So watching how that works and how that chemistry develops it's going to be interesting all training camp, preseason, and obviously into the regular season. Cause I don't think no one's going to be a finished product on opening night.
A lot of people mentioned in the past that Charlie Coyle needs to add a shot first mentality to his game. And we've seen it at times where he's tried to incorporate shot first mentality. And I think last year he started to incorporate that as well. He was playing in a third line role with Taylor Hall, who also could have used the shot first mentality at times, and Frederick, who is, an unfinished offensive product. But with Brad Marchand, do you feel like Charlie Coyle will revert back to, in his mind, I just need to play strong two-way hockey and just facilitate to Marchand, who's a shooter, and DeBrusk, who's a shooter? Do you think he'll try to go back to that facilitator mindset? Should he go back to that mindset, or do you think it benefits all three of those guys if he keeps trying to drive for a shot first mentality? Or is it just don't overthink it? If a shot's there, take it. Just play hockey.
Yeah, I think he definitely has to at least be willing to shoot because we've seen, again, we know it's not going to look exactly the same as Marchand and Bergeron did, but we've seen so many times over the years where Marchand, is holding on to the puck or circling around the net and finds Bergeron in the slot and he's there with a quick release. And, I'm not just talking on the power play, but 5-on-5. And I think those kind of chances will be there for Coyle. Like that's going to open up for him at times where, Marchand will do his thing, holding off a defender, spin this way, that way. And then he's going to make a quick pass. And because the defense has kind of been sucked over to Marchand trying to defend him, he's going to have some space and an opportunity to shoot. And you're going to need him to be ready to pull the trigger. So yeah, he does have to use a shot. And you mentioned, him driving to the net, which I think when Coyle is playing his best and playing with confidence, that's what he's doing. Like, those are the kinds of plays that tell you Coyle has it that night, is when he's coming into the offensive zone with pace and driving to the net. And that has to be there. Like, yes, it's smart if you're a center between Marchand and DeBrusque to get two talented wings of the puck. But that line becomes a lot more dangerous if Coyle is also, creating dangerous chances himself. And um, him driving to the net also opens things up for those guys. So I think that has to be there. That has to be a part of his game. Absolutely. Just a mindset of getting pucks to the net more, going to the net, more goal scoring opportunities, because that's going to open everything else up. If the line, if it's Coyle's the playmaker and it's always just trying to feed Marchand and DeBrusque, I just think that gets too predictable, and teams will be able to defend that.
Yeah, I think you definitely you never want to limit yourself in what you can do out there. So you have to have you can never play in awe of your opponents or even your teammates. Like you have to have the confidence in yourself as an NHLer too. And I think being a local product and a local resident here his whole life, he's been a Bruins fan when he was younger. He knows what Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci for that matter, but Patrice Bergeron meant to the Bruins, meant to the organization from a fan's perspective and also from a player's perspective firsthand. Being in that locker room the last 5 years, I think both of those, the combination of of that mindset, I just think means that he knows he has to step up. And Coyle has his raw ability is spectacular. I mean, he's a big body, he's strong, he's a strong skater, he has good edge work, powerful skater. He's got a good shot when he uses it. He's got good hands when he in tight. He can pass the puck. So he has all the tools. It's just that for Coyle, the knock on him throughout his career has been consistency, bringing it night to night. And he's a prideful player. Like he you hear him talk, you watch him, like he works hard, he wants to work hard. So I think an elevated role in knowing that the team's success really kind of rides or dies on him and Zaka's ability up the middle. I think hopefully he can step up, because when Coyle's on his game, you watch him and you say to yourself, I mean, he can dominate at this level on any given shift because he has the tools. But so it'll be fun to watch, and hopefully he can step up. Scott, were there any other takeaways from captain's practice or just the last few weeks in general worth going over as well tonight?
Well, on captain's practice, I think has to be noted that as of right now, they still don't have a captain in terms of who's wearing the C on their jersey. But I think Tuesday, I already thought this, and Tuesday just reinforced it for me. But Brad Marchand's the next captain, and I feel like trying to pick someone else is just overthinking it. Um, Marchand basically led that practice. Like, he was one of the first ones out there. He was at the front of the group when they were drawing up drills and going over stuff. He was the one who was available to media right afterwards. He was the sort of the first interview, and was certainly the longest, had the biggest media scrum around him. Not that I think this is a big deal or anything, but it's worth noting that Charlie McAvoy and David Pastrnak weren't there. So, if you're talking about other candidates to wear the C, like, you would think if either one of them thought there was even a chance that they were going to be the next C, you'd kind of expect them to like make a point to be there for the first captain's practice. I don't think it's a big deal otherwise, because a lot of veterans come in late. They don't show up day one and stay there all 2 weeks. But yeah, so I thought, just like after Chara left, that was more obvious that it was going to be Bergeron. But Bergeron was clearly the one leading captain's practice and in charge of things. maybe it's not quite as obvious, for Marchand to be Bergeron's successor, but I still think it's fairly obvious. And what we saw Tuesday was someone who looks like he's the captain and has taken on that responsibility already. You know, we asked him about it and he said, I'm not really thinking about it. It's got to be a collective effort no matter who has a C. Like, he said all the right things. He actually, I thought it was pretty expansive in terms of like lessons he's learned from Bergeron, Chara, other leaders over the years in terms of, how to bring a team together and make sure everyone's on the same page, has the same goals, feels like they're valued on and off the ice. And even that, like even just in that interview, he sounded like a captain. Like I can remember other years where the first time we talked to Marchand, whether it was captain's practice at training camps, it was a lot looser and he's kind of joking around and playing that role. And this was a more, there were still some jokes in there, right? Like at one point he talked about how you get older and mature and he's like, well, I don't know if I did that, but like he would still throw in those one-liners, but it sounded like a more serious leader from Marchand on Tuesday.
I believe that the only way Marchand is not the captain is if the team elects to go no captain, which it's been done before. I mean, sometimes teams in a pinch, it feels like a force to pick somebody, or you just whatever. I think given it's their 100th season coming up, maybe they'll want a captain for certain PR reasons and whatnot. But so that's one way he wouldn't be the captain. But if McAvoy or Pasternak or somebody else, but one of those two, if they got this C, I think it would only be because Marchand directed it to be that way. Like I'll still be me in the room. I'll still be in it, a de facto captain, but maybe they can start to transition into the next great leader while I'm still whatever. But it would have to be I think Marchand's probably direction or advice, because I don't see the Bruins bypassing Marchand to give McAvoy or Pasternak the C. So those are the two scenarios where he wouldn't be captain. But in any event, Scott, did anybody stand out from I know it was captain's practice. I know not a lot of players were there, but I do believe Mason Lohrei was there. Lysell was not there, or any of those younger forwards there.
Yeah, Lysell wasn't. Mark McLaughlin was out there. Trying to think. Give me 2 seconds. I'll pull up.
Yeah, I mean, Marchand was out there. James Van Riemsdyk was out there. I don't know if Van Riemsdyk, you could tell in a summer captain's practice, Scott, if he still had his powerful strides intact. I know, like, he's another player where like the Bruins are going to need him to. We talk about Coyle and Zacha having to step up maybe in a role that's not suited for them. On paper, like JVR is another guy. Like they're probably going to ask him to do a little bit more than what he's capable of, but playing alongside Pasternak at least to start, hopefully he can reach some of those limits. But yeah. So Scott, any young guys, old guys, anybody between it may have stood out or.
Yeah, I don't know what really stood out because, like you said, it's sort of hard to judge. They're not really going all out. It's kind of, especially early on in these captain's practices, it's more just about kind of getting back out there, getting up to speed a little bit, feeling the puck, all that stuff. But for other guys who are out there, Trevor Kuntar, who actually wasn't on the ice at development camp because he had surgery after BC season, or actually he had already signed, so after Providence's, I guess, whatever. But yeah, he was out there for it. Brett Harrison, Laura, yes. A few other, Coyle and Carlo were like the other, returning veterans, team leaders who were there. Some of the newcomers, JVR and Shattenkirk. So someone said Morgan Geekie was there, and I'm actually not 100% sure. I initially thought he was, and then realized the player I thought was him, because he's wearing 39 this season, was actually Patrick Brown, who's 38. So I don't know if Geekie was also out there. It's really hard to tell because they're not wearing that. they're just wearing pennies. Like they're not wearing numbers on their jerseys. So you have to just try to see the helmet, and then some of them don't even have their Bruins helmets with what their number is going to be. So wasn't always the easiest to identify guys. But yeah, so those were kind of the just the guys that stood out in terms of like bodies that were out there. Both goalies, Swayman and Ullmark, were there, as was Brandon Bussey. Um, so yeah, and I'm sure again, the next one that's open to media is Friday. I won't be there because I'm traveling for a wedding. And then the next one after that isn't until like the day before training camp. So there's going to be a lot more guys filtering in throughout this week, next week. And my guess is by the time we get to that last one right before camp, it's probably going to look like just about a full team. So, um, but yeah, so Marchand, Coyle, Carlo being out there, I think is, pretty significant because it's like those are the Marchand as the leader and Carlo and Coyle kind of running deputy a little bit, at least on day one. I don't know if anyone new got there Wednesday. I think Alex Chiasson arrived just towards the end of it. He actually, I think, got out on the ice, did a little skating, and then they kind of wrapped up. Danton Heinen, I'm assuming, probably just arrived. So yeah, like everyone's going to be coming in.
Yep, and they'll be coming in quick because the first preseason game against the Rangers is, I believe, it's a little bit less than 3 weeks away, right? So it's ramping up pretty quick. I think the 24th, I believe, is
Yeah.
the first game. So, and another important note, I think they're doing, I want to say September 16th, or I think is the Bruins are having their centennial uniform fashion show unveiling. They're bringing in a new home road sweater, a third alternate sweater. So that'll be something to follow as well. New look out there on the ice. I noticed Warrior had a new the Centennial logo, which looks pretty sharp. Again, for those who don't know, it's pretty much the Cam Neely, Ray Bourque era logo. Any of the any Centennial Committee news or dates you want to drop, Scott, or anything important of note before regular season debut of the Bruins?
Well, actually, so we're recording this Wednesday night, and actually Thursday is when we, as the Centennial Committee, get together and pick our Centennial team. So pick the 12 best forwards, 6 defensemen, 2 goalies who are going to make up the 20-player Bruins All Centennial team, which won't be announced until October, so we can't spoil anything after. But yeah, we'll be getting together Thursday to go through that, and I think they're going to be releasing the top 100 list sometime shortly after that. I don't think that's being held till October, so that's probably coming pretty soon. That was just basically just a tabulation of all of our lists. So all of us on the committee had to rank 1 through 100 most legendary Bruins, and I think they just threw those into a computer, and it's going to add them all up, assign point values, whatever, and spit out a group top 100 list that will be getting released at some point. Yeah, you're that. I do like that logo. That is sharp. So you got to see that on the ice. I tweeted out a photo if people want to scroll through my Twitter or X now at smclaughlin9.
Still not used to that. I still
No,
looked at my phone the first time. I was going through my phone and I was like, "What the hell is this X app that I downloaded?" I don't know what this is. I was like, "What
and
is this?"
and I like just got now. I don't use Threads anymore. Like I don't think anyone else does. That was sort of a seems like that's kind of a flash in the pan, but it turned to X right after Threads launched, and they both were like the black background. And I had them next to each other, and I was like, "All right, I got to move one of these because like I can't tell them apart. Like I keep clicking the wrong thing. Who knows? I'm gonna be threading when I should be tweeting, and Xing when I should be threading. Like what the hell?
You zigged and you're supposed to zag. Yeah. Well, so cool. Yeah. So lots to look forward to with the Centennial announcements and different things throughout the season and starting with the top 100. That's pretty cool. So Scott's, you got a couple of weddings, Scott. Bridget's on vacation right now. I'm going away for a week, end of September. So we're getting our obligations out of the way so that when October comes around, we're, three times a week, like clockwork, we'll be back at it. So I'm looking forward to it, but we still have about a month before we really rev up here.
Yeah, I'm gonna be missing that jersey unveiling, which I'm not bummed because it's my sister's wedding, and that is clearly more
Yeah,
important. So like,
of course, yeah.
totally like cool with that. But I mean, look, it's been a while since we've had a fashion segment. I would love to be there for it, and we could do like live reaction after. But yeah, I will be away first officiating my sister's wedding, and then hopefully getting nice and happy and drunk. So
It's not distasteful to wear a Bruins jersey to a wedding, especially when you're officiating, is it? I think people would understand that.
I think I'm gonna see if I can talk to someone at the Bruins, and maybe I can like do my own unveiling of the Centennial jersey at the wedding. See, see if I can
That'd
get
be cool.
something going there.
That would be awesome. That'd be awesome. Yeah. So look, the season is well, it's September 6th, so I think the regular season starts about a month from now, or maybe 5 weeks. But regardless, once preseason starts, those weeks will fly by. So it's right around the corner. A lot to look forward to before the regular season opener. So for all of that, obviously listen to the pod and watch us on YouTube. We'll be following along, and thank you all for listening. We've appreciated the listenership and the engagement. I mean, it was a longer summer than we all hoped regarding Boston Bruins hockey. So it's been a grind at times over the last 3 months, but there always seems to be something to talk about, Scott. And going forward, there'll be no shortage of topics. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's gonna be, for all the reasons we've talked about, just such an interesting camp and preseason. Just because there's so many jobs open and there's so many guys battling for them, whether they're the veterans that they signed, the guys on PTOs, the young kids who are in Providence, or maybe even guys who haven't even played in the pros yet. Like I'm thinking of a Matthew Poitras, who I think is expected to be at training camp. And again, I don't expect him to make the team or anything. I think another year in juniors will be just fine. But like he's going to be there, and you never know. There's more openings, less settled jobs than usual, so it wouldn't be insane for someone like that to really impress and all of a sudden force a conversation.
Hey, look, Scott, I'd like to say we all watch sports for the championship, but only one team wins a title every year in each major sport, and you get 30 plus fan bases per sport that show up every year and watch it. So you watch for the storylines, you hope for the championship, and we'll definitely have the former. The latter, I guess time will tell. But until then, thank you all very much for listening, and we will talk to you very soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.